kicked out of first class for looking cheap, they unknowingly threw off the man about to detonate their multi-billion-dollar deal. The worn-in comfort of my favorite gray hoodie felt like a second skin. It was my go-to travel uniform, paired with a pair of jeans that had seen better days and sneakers that had walked miles of concrete. This wasn't just about comfort, it was a deliberate choice, a reminder of where I came from. I had just spent a week at a youth coding camp I funded in my old neighborhood, sleeping on a couch and living off pizza and passion. The kids didn't care about designer labels. They cared about whether you could help them debug a line of Python, and frankly, so did I. Now, sinking into the plush, buttery leather of seat 2A in first class, I felt the familiar whiplash of transition in between my two worlds. I closed my eyes, savoring the quiet hum of the cabin, already planning the presentation I needed to finalize on this 10-hour flight to London. This seat wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. It was my office, my bed, and my one chance to arrive rested enough to close a multi-million-dollar deal. The quiet was shattered by a cacophony of loud chatter and the cloying scent of aggressive perfume. I opened my eyes to see a couple standing in the aisle, dripping with logos. He was in a crisp, tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, with a gaudy gold watch that caught the cabin lights. She was a vision in beige, from her stiletto heels to her handbag, which she held like a holy relic. They looked at the cabin not as a shared space, but as a kingdom they were about to grace with their presence. Then her eyes landed on me. Her perfectly manicured brow furrowed in distaste. She leaned over and whispered something to her husband, a stage whisper that was designed to be heard. "Are you sure this is the right cabin? I thought we paid for exclusivity." The husband, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a sneer, scanned the cabin, and his gaze also locked onto me. He didn't even try to be subtle. He waved a dismissive hand in my direction and spoke to the flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah according to her name tag. "Excuse me," he said, his voice oozing entitlement. "There seems to be a mistake. I think this gentleman might be lost." I felt a familiar hot knot tighten in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd played this game more times than I could count. I just kept my gaze on my laptop screen, pretending not to hear. Sarah, the flight attendant, approached me with a hesitant, apologetic smile. "Sir, can I just see your boarding pass one more time?" I complied without a word, pulling it up on my phone. She glanced at it, then back at the couple. "He's in the right seat, sir, seat 2A." The woman scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. "That can't be right. Look at him. He looks like he should be in the back with the luggage. Did he use a stolen card? You should check his ID." This was a new level of audacity. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Every head in the small first-class cabin was now turned towards us. The silence was deafening. I could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment, the silent agreement with the obnoxious couple. "Ma'am, that's not necessary," said, though her voice lacked conviction. She was young, intimidated. The husband stepped forward, looming over my seat. "We paid a significant amount of money for these tickets. Part of that price is for a certain ambiance, a certain class of traveler. We don't feel comfortable with people who look so cheap." Cheap. The word echoed in my head. Not poor, not lost, cheap. It was an insult designed to strip away my dignity, to reduce my entire existence down to the faded cotton of my hoodie. I had built a software company from the ground up, employing over 500 people. I had lectured at universities, advised politicians, and created charitable foundations. But in that moment, to this man, I was just cheap. I finally looked up, meeting his arrogant gaze. "I can assure you," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "my ticket cost the same as yours." "I highly doubt that," the woman sneered. "People like you are always trying to scam the system." This was the point of no return.
The flight attendant was now looking frantically between me and the couple, her professionalism crumbling under their relentless pressure. The husband turned his full attention to her. "Are you going to do something about this, or do I need to speak to your supervisor? We want him removed now." "Sir, I can't just remove a passenger with a valid ticket," Sarah stammered. "Then make his ticket invalid. It's probably fraudulent anyway," he boomed. I slowly began to pack my laptop away. I knew how this would end. I saw the captain approaching from the cockpit, a grim look on his face. He'd been summoned to deal with the disturbance. He would listen to the loud, belligerent, well-dressed couple, and he would look at me. And he would make a choice, the path of least resistance. "Sir," the captain said, addressing me, not them, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stood up, grabbing my worn backpack. As I stepped into the aisle, the smug, triumphant smirk on the husband's face was infuriating. He leaned in as I passed, his voice a low, victorious hiss meant only for me. "Don't take it personally," he whispered, a cloud of expensive cologne washing over me. He thought he was delivering the final blow, the final insult, but all he did was hand me a weapon, a name, a purpose. Omnicorp. I stopped at the cabin door and turned back, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I looked directly at him, letting him see the shift in my eyes from weary resignation to icy resolve. "Omnicorp?" I said, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "Omnicorp? Interesting. Well, you have a nice flight. I'm sure it will be very, very productive for you."
The walk back up the jet bridge was a strange kind of perp walk. A few passengers from economy class, still waiting to board, stared at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They didn't know the story, but they saw a black man in a hoodie being escorted off the first-class cabin by the captain, and their minds filled in the blanks. I didn't meet their gazes. My focus was singular, a burning point of light in my mind: Omnicorp. The airline's ground manager was profusely apologetic, wringing her hands and offering me a voucher, a meal coupon, and a seat on the next flight out in 8 hours. It was a standard corporate damage control script, designed to placate and dismiss. "I don't want a voucher," I said, my voice even. "I want the names of the 2 passengers in 2C and 2D, the ones who made the complaint." The manager paled. "Sir, I'm afraid I can't give you that information due to privacy policies." "I see," I said, nodding slowly. "And I'm afraid your airline is about to have a significant PR problem due to your discrimination policies." I pulled out my phone, not to make a call, but to start a simple voice recording. "Could you repeat for me why I was removed from the flight I paid for?" Panic flickered in her eyes. "Sir, it was a disturbance. The captain has the final say." I didn't push. I had what I needed. Not her confession, but the name the man had so arrogantly given me. I accepted the lounge pass she offered and found a quiet corner, ignoring the complimentary champagne and gourmet snacks. I opened my laptop, a sleek, custom-built machine that was the engine of my entire enterprise, and plugged in my noise-canceling headphones. The world outside, the airport announcements, the clinking glasses, it all faded away. My first call was to Jessica, my COO and the smartest person I know. It was 3 a.m. her time, but she answered on the first ring, her voice instantly alert. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "I missed my flight," I said calmly. "Missed it? Marcus, the Omnicorp deal closes in London in less than 48 hours. You're the keynote speaker at the merger announcement." A cold, grim satisfaction settled over me. Of course, that's the Omnicorp deal he was talking about. It wasn't just some random merger. It was one I was tangentially but publicly involved in. The universe had a funny, brutal way of connecting the dots. "That's the one," I said. "Jess, I need you to do 2 things. First, get the jet fueled up. I'm flying to London privately. File the flight plan now. I'll be at the private hangar in an hour. Second, I need a name.
The lead negotiator for the acquisition, the guy from the acquiring firm, Valerius Investments, the man who's been handling the Omnicorp side of the deal. Richard Davies, she said instantly, no need to even look it up. Pompous jerk. Why? Because Richard and his wife just had me kicked off my flight, I said. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Jessica's voice dropped an octave, losing all traces of sleepiness and gaining a razor's edge. Say that again. I told her the whole story, every infuriating detail. The whispers, the cheap comment, the triumphant smirk. When I was done, she didn't offer sympathy. Jessica wasn't the sympathetic type. She was the problem solver. Okay, she said, the single word loaded with menace. Richard Davies. Valerius has been trying to break into the socially conscious tech space for years. Buying Omnicorp, a company known for its ethical AI research, is their golden ticket to legitimacy. They've staked their entire quarterly forecast on this merger. And having you, Marcus Thorne, founder of Atlas Initiative, speak at the announcement is the cherry on top. They give them the credibility they could never earn on their own. A plan, sharp and vicious, began to form in my mind. So my presence isn't just a bonus, it's integral. It's the whole damn show, Marcus, she confirmed. Without your endorsement, a lot of the key Omnicorp engineers, the ones who only agreed to the merger because they trust you, might walk. The deal could collapse. I looked out the lounge window at the commercial airline I was supposed to be on, its lights blinking as it prepared to pull away from the gate. I imagined Richard Davies in C2C, sipping champagne, believing he had won. He had no idea he was flying towards a professional guillotine. He thought he'd removed a piece of riffraff. In reality, he just ejected the very man who held the pen to his career-defining grenade. Jess, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, cancel my keynote speech and draft a press release. The Atlas Initiative is formally rescinding its endorsement of the Valerius Omnicorp merger, effectively immediately. Cite, a fundamental misalignment of values that has recently come to light with Valerius's senior leadership. Marcus, she breathed, the sound of shock and vicious glee. This will detonate the entire deal. I know, I said, and I'll be the one lighting the fuse. I'm on my way. I hung up, snapped my laptop shut, and walked out of the lounge without a backward glance. My private jet was faster. I would be in London hours before their commercial flight even touched down. Richard Davies thought he was flying towards the biggest triumph of his life. He had no idea I was about to turn his destination into the site of his own career's funeral. And I was going to make damn sure I had a front row seat. The flight on my own jet was a world away from the commercial cattle car I'd been ejected from. The deep hum of the Gulfstream's engines was a soothing balm, the silence of the cabin absolute. There were no sneering couples, no judgmental stares, just my trusted pilot, a pot of strong black coffee, and the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic below. But I found no comfort in the luxury. The quiet only amplified the echoes of the words, cheap, riffraff, people like you. They fueled a cold, surgical anger inside me, a precision instrument I was now sharpening for use. By the time we began our descent into London, my team had executed my orders with brutal efficiency. The press release had been sent out to every major financial news outlet on the planet. My phone was vibrating itself off the polished mahogany table, a relentless stream of alerts from Bloomberg, Reuters, the Wall Street Journal. The headlines were sensational. Marcus Thorne pulls support for Omnicorp merger, citing values misalignment. And tech mogul shock move puts $2 billion deal in jeopardy. The Valerius investment stock, which had been climbing steadily in anticipation of the merger, had already begun to plummet in pre-market trading. The shock wave was just beginning. I landed at Luton Airport's private terminal and was met by a sleek black car.
My London suit, a tailored charcoal masterpiece that cost more than Richard Davies's watch, was hanging pristine in the back. As the car sped towards the city, I changed out of my hoodie and jeans. It wasn't about hiding who I was. It was about putting on armor. Today, I needed them to see not the man from the old neighborhood, but the titan of industry they had so foolishly underestimated. My first meeting wasn't at the Valerius headquarters. It was at a discreet five-star hotel with Omnicorp's CEO, a brilliant but weary man named Alastair Finch. I had known Alastair for years. He was the reason Omnicorp had such a stellar reputation for ethics, and he was the only reason I'd even considered endorsing this merger. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week when I walked into the private suite he'd booked. "Marcus," he said, his voice strained as he shook my hand. "What in God's name is going on? My board is in full-blown panic. Valerius is hemorrhaging value. What misalignment of values are you talking about?" I sat down opposite him and looked him straight in the eye. "Alastair, did you know that your lead negotiator from Valerius, Richard Davies, had me forcibly removed from a flight yesterday?" Alastair blinked, his confusion deepening. "What? Removed? Why?" "Because, in his words, I looked too cheap for first class and was ruining the ambiance for him and his wife." The color drained from Alastair's face. He was a good man, and I saw the genuine horror in his eyes. He understood immediately. It wasn't just about a rude comment on an airplane. It was about the fundamental culture of the company he was about to sell his life's work to. Omnicorp was built on inclusivity and merit. Valerius, as personified by Davies, was built on arrogant, bigoted elitism. "Oh my God, Marcus," he whispered, "I had no idea." He told me, as I was being escorted off the plane, that he was on his way to London to finalize the Omnicorp merger, I continued, my voice flat and cold. He thought it was the final insult, a way to put me in my place. He wanted me to know that he was a big shot and I was nobody. Alastair buried his face in his hands. "This is a disaster." "It is," I agreed. "Which is why Omnicorp needs to invoke the character and reputational risk clause in your merger agreement. Clause 12B. You have an out, Alastair. You can kill the deal right now, citing that the behavior of Valerius's senior representative has caused irreparable reputational damage to the impending partnership." He looked up, a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes. The clause was a standard one, but rarely used. It was a corporate nuke. They'll fight it. They'll say it was a personal matter, unrelated to the business. And I will personally go on every news network and tell the entire world, in excruciating detail, exactly what he said and did, I countered. I will attach my face and my story to their company. Let's see how their stock fares then. Let's see how many of your brilliant engineers stick around to work for a man like that. The decision was made in that moment of silence. Alastair knew I was right. He picked up his phone and called an emergency board meeting. The tide had turned. As I left the hotel, I saw that Richard Davies's flight had landed an hour ago. He would be heading to his office, smug and triumphant, ready to celebrate the deal of a lifetime. He would walk into his boardroom expecting champagne and applause. He would have no idea that the entire world was already reading about the scandal, that his company's stock was in free fall, and that the CEO of the company he thought he'd acquired was currently meeting with his board to cut him loose. I directed my driver to take me to the Valerius Investments building in Canary Wharf. I wasn't going to let this play out from a distance. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see his face when the world he had so carefully constructed came crashing down around him. I wanted him to see the riffraff who was responsible. I timed my arrival perfectly. As I strode into the gleaming marble lobby of the Valerius Tower, I saw him. Richard Davies, flanked by a few junior executives, was just stepping out of the elevator. He was laughing, preening, accepting their congratulations. Then his eyes drifted towards the entrance, and he saw me.
His laughter died in his throat. His face went slack with utter disbelieving shock. He saw the charcoal suit, the confident stride, the icy calm in my eyes. He saw the man from seat 2A, but he wasn't looking at a piece of riffraff anymore. He was looking at a ghost, his ghost of Christmas future, come to show him the ruins of his life. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stood there, frozen, as the first alerts began to ping on the phones of the executives surrounding him, their smiles vanishing as they read the headlines. The auras of the junior executives around Richard Davies shifted from celebratory to horrified in the span of 10 seconds. One of them, a young man who looked barely out of university, stared at his phone and then at me, his face a mask of dawning comprehension. The opulent marble lobby of Valerius Investments, moments before a stage for Richard's triumph, suddenly felt like a tomb. "Marcus Thorne," Richard finally stammered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. The sneering, confident man from the plane was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. He was connecting the dots in real time, the sequence of events flashing behind his eyes. The man in the hoodie, the arrogant dismissal, the press release, the stock alert, and now the man himself, standing before him like a specter of his own creation. "In the flesh," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. I didn't raise it. I didn't need to. "I believe we met yesterday. You were concerned about my ambiance." His wife, who had been standing slightly behind him, clutching her beige handbag like a life raft, let out a small, strangled gasp. Her perfectly made-up face had gone pale and blotchy. She looked at me, then at her husband, the accusation clear in her eyes. This was his fault. Before Richard could formulate a response, his phone began to shriek. Then the phones of his colleagues joined in, a cacophony of urgent, panicked ringing. The CEO was calling, the board was calling, the press was calling. The world they thought they owned was demanding answers for the mess he had made. He fumbled to answer his phone, his hand trembling. "Charles, I can explain." He listened for a moment, his face crumpling. "No, it's a misunderstanding. Charles, please." The call ended abruptly. He had been hung up on. The finality of it was brutal. "It seems your deal is having some complications," I observed, taking a deliberate step forward. The junior executives instinctively recoiled, creating a circle around Richard and me, as if we were two gladiators in an arena. You did this," he whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and despair. "You ruined me over a misunderstanding on an airplane." "A misunderstanding?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "There was no misunderstanding, Richard. You saw a black man in a hoodie in a space you felt he didn't belong, and you decided he needed to be removed. You judged my entire worth based on a piece of cotton. You didn't see a person. You saw riffraff. You didn't just insult me, you revealed the rotten core of your character. And it turns out that character is a significant liability for a multi-billion-dollar corporation." I paused, letting the words sink in. "You told me it was just business as you had me thrown off the flight. Well, this is just business too. My business. The Atlas Initiative is built on the idea that talent and potential can come from anywhere, regardless of what someone wears or where they grew up. Your actions proved that you, and by extension Valerius, stand for the exact opposite. Endorsing your merger would have been a betrayal of everything I've built. From the corner of my eye, I saw building security approaching, alerted to the commotion. But they stopped short, unsure of who the threat was. I was the calm in the center of the storm. It was Richard who was unraveling. "My career, my life's work," he choked out. "Was built on a foundation of arrogance and prejudice," I finished for him. "And a foundation that weak was bound to collapse. You just happened to kick out the final support beam yourself." I turned my attention to his wife, who was now weeping silently. "And you," I said, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its steel. "You wondered if I'd used a stolen credit card. Let me give you some free advice. The next time you're about to judge someone based on their appearance, remember this moment. Remember the price of your prejudice. It's much higher than you think." With that, I had said everything I needed to say. My work was done. I turned and walked towards the revolving doors, leaving Richard Davies standing in the wreckage of his career, surrounded by the silent judgment of his former acolytes. As I stepped out into the crisp London air, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Alastair Finch at Omnicorp. "Board voted unanimously. Deal is dead. Thank you, Marcus. You saved my company." A few minutes later, another message came through. It was from Jessica. "Valerius Board has issued a statement. Richard Davies has been terminated, effective immediately. They're calling it the fastest self-immolation in corporate history." I allowed myself a small, grim smile. I took no joy in destroying a man's life, but I took immense satisfaction in the knowledge that justice, in this case, had been swift and absolute. He hadn't been ruined by my power or my money. He had been ruined by his own bigotry. He had handed me the gun, loaded it, and pointed at his own head. All I did was help him pull the trigger. I got back in the car, shed the suit jacket, and leaned my head against the cool leather of the seat. The anger had finally dissipated, replaced by a familiar weariness. The fight was over. Now the work could begin. I had a new plan. I was going to call Alastair back and propose a different kind of deal. A partnership between Omnicorp and the Atlas Initiative. We would fund a new incubator for diverse talent, finding the brilliant minds that people like Richard Davies would have dismissed on sight. We would build something better, something stronger, on the ashes of his defunct deal. From the corner of my eye, I saw building security approaching, alerted to the commotion. But they stopped short, unsure of who the threat was. I was the calm in the center of the storm. It was Richard who was unraveling. "My career, my life's work," he choked out, "was built on a foundation of arrogance and prejudice," I finished for him. "And a foundation that weak was bound to collapse. You just happened to kick out the final support beam yourself." I turned my attention to his wife, who was now weeping silently. "And you," I said, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its steel. "You wondered if I'd used a stolen credit card. Let me give you some free advice. The next time you're about to judge someone based on their appearance, remember this moment. Remember the price of your prejudice. It's much higher than you think." With that, I had said everything I needed to say. My work was done. I turned and walked towards the revolving doors, leaving Richard Davies standing in the wreckage of his career, surrounded by the silent judgment of his former acolytes. As I stepped out into the crisp London air, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Alastair Finch at Omnicorp. "Board voted unanimously. Deal is dead. Thank you, Marcus. You saved my company." A few minutes later, another message came through. It was from Jessica. "Valerius Board has issued a statement. Richard Davies has been terminated, effective immediately. They're calling it the fastest self-immolation in corporate history." I allowed myself a small, grim smile. I took no joy in destroying a man's life, but I took immense satisfaction in the knowledge that justice, in this case, had been swift and absolute. He hadn't been ruined by my power or my money. He had been ruined by his own bigotry. He had handed me the gun, loaded it, and pointed at his own head. All I did was help him pull the trigger. I got back in the car, shed the suit jacket, and leaned my head against the cool leather of the seat. The anger had finally dissipated, replaced by a familiar weariness. The fight was over. Now the work could begin. I had a new plan. I was going to call Alastair back and propose a different kind of deal. a partnership between Omnicorp and the Atlas Initiative. We would fund a new incubator for diverse talent, finding the brilliant minds that people like Richard Davies would have dismissed on sight. We would build something better, something stronger, on the ashes of his defunct deal. He thought he was kicking a nobody off a plane. He had no idea he was just clearing the way for a whole new generation to fly.